for a very long time, I was always a cinephile, but I never thought seriously that I would become a filmmaker. I was studying ecology, and then in Beijing, and then went to United States in Michigan to continue studying it. As myself, they would be more interested in art or humanities, but their parents would convince them to study science just because during the Cultural Revolution, the artists or writers, these were the people who suffered the most. So for my parents' generation, if you do something more technical, then you would end up in a safer place. So I guess that was the main reason. So I studied the science earlier. But then when I was in United States, I decided to quit that. I was already kind of an amateur photographer that was something I was very much interested in. I also started doing photography. By coincidence, I took a class in filmmaking, and I made a short film in with 16 millimeter. And then I realized it wasn't as mysterious or difficult as I imagined. So then I just went on to explore more, making short films on my own. When I lived in Michigan, I was living in this town called Ann Arbor, and every year there is Ann Arbor Film Festival, which is one of the biggest experimental film festival in North America. So I went there to see films every year, and I was able to be exposed to the experimental cinema, which I knew nothing about before I left China. So this kind of also opened an entirely new world for me. So when I moved to Toronto to study film, the experimental film was also the first kind of films I was exploring. Also, by coincidence, I met some teachers at York University in Toronto in the film program, which was later where I studied film, and then I also moved to Toronto, because Toronto is this place with a very high cultural diversity, and my class of film production, filmmaking, we had 9 people from 9 different countries, from Iran, from Italy, from Serbia, from Bosnia. And so this rich cultural diversity, each person brings something different. And it was a really interesting place, like for me to start out, I think. And also some of these friends I met in over there and became like a friend I still keep close touch with now. We collaborate to make work together. So that, in a way really encouraged me. One thing is, I thought probably I was still young. So when you're young, you look forward, you don't look backward. So I at that time I discovered this whole new world that all the things I had in mind is just continue exploring it. And on the other hand, my old career path was I already completely abandoned it. There's no way for me to go back anymore. So I also didn't have any choice, basically. But there's also another thing that encouraged me is when I once traveled from Ann Arbor to Toronto, I met my later supervisor for my filmmaking, and at that time I wasn't sure that I would even be qualified to apply for a master program in film school. I thought I only had 2 films made. I still had to do a lot more, but he encouraged me to apply for the program. So, but I didn't know that I would be able to get in. I already bought my ticket to go back to China to continue making more work there. And I imagine I would, collect together a portfolio and then maybe apply somewhere. But just before I was leaving for China from US, I heard back from the school in Toronto that I was accepted, surprisingly. So yeah, then that became an important step for me to kind of to get into this filmmaking world. It was my second short film, and during that time I was still like concentrating very much in photography. And then I happened to be reading Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, which is a very classical piece, contemplating on photographic image. So this film ended up becoming my personal reflection on photographic image. And on that film, I didn't have any script. So it was rather kind of a little journey that I took piece by piece. So each step I take, I would come up with a new idea or new image in my head, and then I would try to enact or ask somebody to act out the scene for me. And most of them were Chinese friends I had when I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So they would come work for free with me, and then we come up with a scene and do it together. And then the shape of the film also very much come together in the post-production, because I didn't have script at all. In Michigan was quite close to Detroit. In Detroit, there are lots of this abandoned architecture. So one of the places I went to for filming was this old train station, which was abandoned in the 80s. It's in fact a bit dangerous because this building is abandoned. Also, there could be pieces falling from the ceiling, from the wall, who knows. So while we were filming, we had to keep watching out, for maybe the police would come by. And also at that time, I wasn't very familiar, for example, with using Bolex camera. I made so many mistakes, but the whole image was overexposed. I didn't realize until I got my film developed. But then I also realized with the kind of abandoned architecture, those overexposed image actually brought a stronger feeling or stronger emotion to it. Kind of a little bit surreal about a musician who is a little bit crazy. So he came to this train station that which is already abandoned, but in his mind there are still trains leaving there, going to other places. So at the end, it was also kind of spontaneously we came up with this idea to have the musician playing his clarinet inside of this abandoned train station. It's a very short film. It's 5 minutes, but it's 16 millimeter hand processed. So it was a result of kind of a summer workshop that I attended. It was this place called Film Farm, which runs by my supervisor. He transformed that farm space into a film studio. So I shot everything on the farm and then developed there. And then I used optical printer to manipulate the image. The idea is to use each frame of the film as kind of a music note, and then use optical printer to manipulate the duration of each of this note, and then just improvise kind of a visual music That film is silent, it doesn't have sound to it. I started working on my thesis film for the film school. In the beginning, I thought I would want to make a film about Peking opera, because the city where my parents live has a very rich Peking opera culture, and also my father he learns to sing Peking opera, and then he's also like a big fan of it. So I started shooting things on Peking opera around the city, but then just also by coincidence I encountered a small shadow play performance in the countryside close to my parents' city. I was interested in making films with 16 millimeter hand processed. So I thought at that time I was very interested in thinking about the beginning of cinema or early cinema. And then when I saw the shadow play, it just hit me as this childhood of cinema. And then I immediately thought I really wanted to make a film about this. I always think, cinema didn't just start from Lumiere. Like this, because even recently, once I was taking the airplane, and on it I saw this fascinating documentary made by French people about the prehistorical cinema, which is in these caves in southern France and Spain. And then there was these paintings in the caves, and then there would be animals with multiple heads. One look forward, one look backward, and also with cows or bulls. They, instead of having 4 legs, they have 8 legs. 4 of the legs running forward, 4 of the legs running backward. So, and then it turned out that archaeologists found out it was really, when the historical human beings were having their ceremonies, they would lit out bonfires, and under the effect of the bonfires, these animals with this, multiple heads, multiple legs, there started to be this illusion, under the blinking light, of illusion of the movement. So the conclusion is the human being's internal urge of making image move came a long way. And I think shadow theater was just one step along this very, very long history. I think it's this whole history of the entire world, they somehow all blend with each other. But in terms of motion picture in China, I would say it's something that brought by Chinese people from the West. I don't think the history of motion picture is fundamentally different. After I left the film school, I continued to work on my film projects, and then one of the projects led into this feature of shadows. If you think about this visual culture, how framing comes along, how movement comes along. Of course, in Chinese cinema, as in, say, Japanese cinema, it also connects with a different visual culture, which connects, for example, with the Chinese ink painting. If you think about, this famous Chinese film made by the director Fei Mu in the 40s, The Spring of a Small Town, the kind of rhythm, the kind of framing really reminds you a lot of Chinese painting, I would say. For a film like Of Shadows, I don't even think I was playing the role of director, and I didn't even feel like I was directing anything. The role I was playing is more like a gleaner, that I was mostly immersing myself into that world, into that universe, and into that environment. and then gradually discover things one after the other, and then just collect them. Also because this was in fact the first documentary like I made, and the ones before was mostly experimental short films. And also this kind of approach, I would say, I was influenced a lot by my teacher. Um, his filmmaking very much comes from this tradition of process-driven filmmaking, which is something that doesn't come from a linear narrative or doesn't come from a script. It's rather about collecting image from your daily life. In your home, you could all taking pictures from this mundane life, and then the form or the structure of a film kind of grows out of this collection. One of the films I made in the Tibetan community in Qinghai, and it's called Through the Looking Glass. In a way, it's part of this bigger project that I've been conceiving or I've been pursuing, which I would call it migrant cinema. So it include a shadow theater, it include the itinerant film projection in the countryside in China, and it also include indigenous filmmaking, including like these places where I went in the Tibetan communities. So it just interests me with this idea of, traditionally, when we talk about theater, when we talk about movies, we think about people going to a theater, going to a fixed place, and then to see film. But there's also this other form of theater, or this other form of moving image performance, which moves through space. And then shadow theater is clearly one of them. So the theater is not like a concrete like building, fixed place of theater. The theater is just basically in the suitcase of these performers, and then they travel from place to place, and then the theater travel with them. And then the same with the itinerant film projection, which in China came from, the whole tradition started basically in the 50s and 60s, when the idea of signification came to China from the Soviet Union. And then in a way that was like for Lenin, that was the way to efficient way to educate people after the revolution, because if you think about say literature for ordinary people, for peasants, for workers, they have to be able to at least to read, to understand the words. But for cinema, there's no such need. So it's a very, for the revolutionaries, it's a very efficient way to educate people. So then in 50s and 60s in China, this idea was basically brought from Soviet to China. And then the government started this project to bring cinema to basically every single rural corner in China, even including the really remote places. And basically, if you think about the rural audience in China around that time, they're very much like the European audience back in the silent film era. There was that there in the 50s and 60s, they encountered the cinema for the first time. So when I did some research about that, it was very interesting, and similar stories like happened when the Lumiere's The Arrival of the Train was shown to the audience. Like people would screaming, would jump out of their seat, or if they see the image of Chairman Mao, they would stand, they would show their respect to, because they think it was the real Mao on the appear. So this was all basically the idea that I was interested in, this broader idea of migrant cinema. And then also another part of it is this project I've been involved in the Tibetan community, when the video camera is given to the local Tibetan villagers, the herdsmen or the monks, and then they would make their own films. So this new short I made is about a small film festival that organized by the Tibetans themselves, and then on a Tibetan pasture, and they would set up tents and then show the films made by themselves, and there would be Tibetan villagers from all over the places in the region. They would ride their horse to travel 30 kilometers to come and see these films. But when I talked to quite many of them, they would tell me, oh, these films, like when I see the life of ourselves on the screen, is so interesting. It's much better than what we watch on TV or what we pay to go to the movie theater to see. When I first entered the cinema, this whole movement, or this whole rich tradition of the North American experimental cinema, which the tradition goes way back to the 60s. If you think about the Brackage, Maya Deren, and of course my teacher Phil Hoffman was also one of the important figure back in the 70s and early 80s in North America experimental film scene. I think Bresson or Hou Xiaoxian, Antonioni, Chantal Ackerman, a great inspiration for me also came from the filmmaker friends I encountered in Toronto when I studied the film there. The earlier films, especially the experimental ones, they were, especially like the time when I was making Camera Lucida, I was very much kind of indulged in the internal personal world, and in a way my main interest was just to go inside, explore this world, and speaking sincerely about this world. I still have this belief that if you are sincere enough with what you say, eventually the words will, the expression will find its audience. But at the same time, it wasn't my main concern of who am I making it for, or whether the image or the construction would communicate smoothly with the audience. It wasn't my main concern at all. But up to a certain point of my making of experimental films, I realized this was becoming a problem. So in a way, maybe the approach in this film is also less experimental. As you can see, it's quite straightforward. So I think that was the part of my effort to look for this channel of communication. But then on the other hand, the theme is also more, it's no longer about my personal world. I think that film does try to address some kind of cultural or social question. So in a way, that kind of question you also want to discuss with a broader audience. So I think when I made that film, I clearly had an audience in mind. And also, for example, this new short film I made in the Tibetan community, because I was even working with a community, so when I made that, I also had audience in mind. But then in the future, I was also thinking that still the the internal human emotional world is a subject that deeply interests me. So for now, I don't know, but I could go back to explore that world again. And then if I go back, what would be the approach with the audience? I don't know yet. Although I remember when Apichapong Versatico was interviewed after he made Tropical Melody, which is a film that I really love, he said that you make your film and then people with similar frequency, these people and the film, eventually they will find each other.